Well, welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting of the Natural Environment Scrutiny Performance Panel. We've only got one major item on the agenda, of course, which we'll come to in a moment. Chris Howell is also present as to step available to assist us in looking at this particular issue. And of course, we'd like to welcome Councillor Mark Thomas, who, as I noted earlier, is now, I think, an honorary member of this committee for his constant attendance at its meetings. So welcome, Mark. Emily, sorry. Oh. Apologies for absence, Emily.
Sorry, Councillor Jones, you broke up slightly. I'll just mention the apologies here. Thank you. We've received apologies from Councillors Christine Richards, Linda Tyler-Lloyd and Mary Sherwood today.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I had a conversation with Mary before this meeting. Please? No? Okay, thank you for that. Prohibition of whipped votes and declaration of party whips was fine. There isn't anything to report under that heading. So moving on then with we have the minutes of the last meeting of this panel, which took place on the 29th of June. And of course, they're the principles on air quality management. So there were a couple of questions from members of the public. It was very interesting. Are there any points that anyone wants to make, questions or comments on the minutes of the last meeting? Or are we content? Okay, thank you for that. Which brings us on swiftly, first of all, to public questions. I understand, Emily, there are no public questions. Is that right?
No public questions today, no.
Okay, thank you. And moving on again swiftly, ash dieback, which of course is the principal business of this afternoon's meeting. Who's going to introduce this? Is it you, Mark, or will it be one of the officers?
Yes, if I could introduce it, Chair. Can I say, just you probably are not aware, but your signal is breaking up quite a bit. So yeah. So what Jeremy suggested is, for those who are not using them, whether it helps the signal if we turn off the our cameras. And that sometimes helps, but I don't know if that works if everybody else turns their camera off. I know sometimes that helps for the person who is talking, but so if you notice some cameras going off, that may be the reason, but it might help improve. I don't know if it helps improve your signal, Chair, but certainly quite a lot of what you were saying was being lost. You're probably not aware of it, but it's.
I wasn't aware of it. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, quite a bit of it. So,
am I audible now?
Yes, very clear now at the moment. So maybe this turning cameras off might help. I don't know, but we can see how it goes. But yeah, there was in your introduction some of it. I think people understood what you were saying. You know, got the gist of what you were saying, but quite a bit of it was just breaking up. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm happy to introduce the report, and as normal, I'd go through it just with the key points on it, really, rather than go through the itemised report, because everybody's had the report in advance. So, and then officers can come in and supplement, or will be there, I suppose, when committee members ask relevant questions, you know, and especially on the technical points of things. But basically, I mean, ash dieback now is you know, it's a very common terminology. I don't think there's many people living in or around Swansea who are not familiar with it, but might not be familiar with the full detail and the implication of it. The background, as is alluded to in the report, is you know, this talks about our responsibilities and the impact of ash dieback is likely to have on our tree stock. And you know, just to add the point as well, this is certainly an all Wales issue. It's an all UK issue, and it's most of Western European issue as well. So it is not, this is not just a blight on the ash trees in Swansea, as I know you, Chair, are very much aware of, but this is something we're tackling on a much wider regional and UK front as well. But the first part of the background talks about what it is, how it affects us, what the impact directly of ash dieback are, and although it approached England before it got to us, so there's a lot more data available from sort of an England point of view, and some rural councils in England think as many as 500,000 ash trees on their land have been affected. So that gives some sort of scale of this. It's projected to affect and infect at least 90% of the ash trees. So very little is immune from it, and it could have a very, very devastating effect, not just on the ash tree itself, but on the landscape they're in, and obviously the impact to the environment of losing all of those trees. So this is a big issue and a big area of concern, and something that we have to front up to and deal with. So on the second element of this, we looked at our strategic response to this. It was in the very early days when it was, the awareness arose, it was considered by us and recorded as a corporate risk because of all the impact. As I said, we've declared a climate emergency, signed up the climate charter, and biodiversity enhancement is one of our corporate priorities. And this is a risk to that. It has a significant impact on, the environment, biodiversity, but also a financial impact as well. It's no mean feat, and it has a huge resource impact for our parks department and particularly our arboriculturists. It is a significant part of the workload that's landed on their doorstep then effectively. So we are having to respond to it, and it's something that we can't shy away from. We have to deal with. The operating response to this is, we've got 47. We've had to survey all of our trees on all of council land. And we're talking in the region of 47 individual trees of varying species on council land. It's a huge task. But what we've focused on is the trees so ash is categorized into 4 categories: 1, 2, 3, and 4, with 3 and 4 being in the worst and perhaps the most dangerous condition. 3 and 4, not only does it mean that they're in a dangerous position, but they're much more difficult to tackle. We can't climb trees to fell them when they're in that condition because they're unstable. So it means using ladders and lifting equipment, to be able to tackle them. So the whole job of felling a tree that's in category 3 and 4 becomes logistically more difficult and more challenging and more time consuming as well. So what we've had to do is focus on the areas of concern, particularly along the highway. So if trees in that condition were diseased to an extent where they fell, there's obviously that risk if they fell onto the highway. So we've done the surveys along the highway and looked to remove, and have made very good progress in tackling those of a critical nature, and to the situation where we haven't got any that are of cause of concern on our public highway at the moment. And obviously public, not just highways, but parks, cemeteries and places like that as well. So on 3.3, we've indicated some numbers of trees that have already been felled in Swansea. And again, that has taken up quite a lot of resource from our arboriculturists. The recovery strategy in section 4 is about developing the toolkit to deal, working with the toolkit to deal with this. And the challenge we've had in the beginning, and of course, some of the first questions we asked ourselves when we had meetings is, well, if we're going to see the removal of thousands of trees, and what are we going to do to replace them? And that is still a challenge and something that we are working on as an authority, and I'm sure every other authority. I mean, one of the biggest obstacles we've got at the moment is this isn't just a matter of finance. Finance is always a factor in all of our processes. We can't ignore costs on that. But also, when we've got our parks teams, arboriculturists out removing trees and absorbing all of that resource, we simply wouldn't have the resource to go around planting thousands of trees. There's also another school of thought that says in some places where trees are felled and removed, it doesn't always require the replanting of trees in that location, because what you find in woodlands, particularly in intense growing areas, where trees fell, other trees and other, nature takes over and will grow, in their place, because saplings grow in the shade of trees. Once big trees are removed or felled or fall, then the other trees come up. So not every tree that's felled would need replacing anyway, by direct planting. So there's nature has its way of dealing with the loss of trees and, leaf cover. The financial implications then on section 5 talk about the estimated cost, because this again is a moving target. It depends with what we're dealing with in that year. But to say that it's costing us 150,000 a year is not an exaggeration, but it's of that ilk. That's the direct financial cost. But what it also does is, because we were lucky, we had a good, strong in-house team of arboriculturists who are continuing to do the bulk of the ash tree removal. But whilst they're doing that, they are obviously not doing what was their day jobs, So what is having to take place now is that where we were doing perhaps tree, trimming, some lopping, some pruning of trees, because the ash exercises seem to be, an emergency work, then things like that have to take place. Obviously, in storms and that, where trees are damaged, or if any tree other than ash gets to a dangerous state, that will be treated in a priority way, and that is dealt with immediately. But members of the public might notice that some of our overgrown branches along the highways aren't cut as often as possible. But so that's a natural consequence of our workforce being tied up, for the bulk of their time dealing with ash dieback. So those are the type of knock-on effects of that. May not be instantly obvious, but I think over a period of time, because we know and recognise very early that the ash removal exercise, ash dieback removal exercise, is going to take years. We're not quite sure of how long it'll take, but it'll be at least a 5-year programme. So, when we're looking at the use of our resources over a 5-year period, then obviously, some of the routine maintenance work that the guys and girls were carrying out is obviously going to, be affected. Hopefully not in too much of a negative way, but that's a natural impact of this sort of thing. We are using in areas of where we would need to remove a large number of trees, particularly affecting highways. We have and will continue to use contractors to do that sort of work, to supplement as well, and use our teams for specialist tricky work, where it's awkward, because some of these trees are not always in easily accessible locations, as you can imagine. So it's that difficult, it's accessing areas to be able to remove the trees and to fell them safely, etc. But just a few other points I wanted to highlight is, we have been able to secure some funding under the circular economy grant funding from Welsh Government as well, which has helped us purchase machinery and equipment, so that the trees that we fell that are not too badly diseased can be reused and are being reused to create furniture and items like that, which we can then sell and have a longer life out of, for want of a better description. But so that's very much so. If you've got to remove the trees, at least some good is coming out of that, and that we can reuse it for furniture, and it does benefit the environment in a small way, through that exercise. That's about all I wanted to highlight, Chair. I mean, I'm obviously prepared to take questions and happy to answer questions. And I don't know if Jeremy or Chris wanted to come in with something in case I missed something in particular that they wanted to highlight, but I'm in your hands now, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy, do you want to add anything to what Marcus has been saying?
No, thank you, Chair. I thought it was a good summary of the overall picture that's been provided within the report.
Gosh, right. Chris, do you want to say anything?
Nothing further from me. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Well, that's very swift. Open to questions and comments to members. I hope you can hear me. I'm a bit nervous in view of the problem we were having earlier. But Wendy, I see your hand is up.
Right.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. I think I'm... Oh, Lord, it keeps coming. Can you hear me? Because it keeps coming to...
I can hear you.
Oh, there we are. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it is devastating, isn't it, that this is happening? And it seems to be, you know, a regular thing. We've had Dutch elm disease. Now it's ash dieback. There's, I think it's Phytophthora. Is it affecting larch trees? And so on and so forth. It just seems that there's one disease after another, and that woodlands are subject to a lot of felling, and not only woodlands, as we know from verges. What just two very basic questions to begin with. What are we doing in terms of replanting? What trees in effect are we replanting with where we are replanting? Because, you know, it seems every tree has got some problem these days. And also you mentioned that Mark mentioned that where we clear trees, then trees will pop up very likely in an open area. If these happen to be ash, presumably they could be affected by you know, the ash dieback disease. That's my understanding, because I've got some small ash trees in pots, and I've been told, well, I can't really grow them because they're going to be affected as the adult trees are. So is that the case? Can anyone elucidate? Thanks.
Please, thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. The progress of ash dieback will affect around 90% of all ash trees, whether they're now in maturity or they're saplings as it stands. So the answer to the question around the fact that any new trees growing naturally that are ash, it is likely that they'll be affected by this because the disease is carried within spores and leaf litter. What we don't want to do is fell all ash trees, because although we are in a crisis in relation to the disease with the trees itself, it's still early days in understanding resistance, and there is an early indication that roughly 5 to 10% of trees may have a genetic resistance. So what we don't want to do is wholesale removal of ash trees, and that's why we do the surveys on an annual basis and look at their condition. As far as replacing trees are concerned, it's really, as Mark alluded to, if we have a single ash within a woodland or a cluster that we remove, we wouldn't replant there. We would allow nature to take its course, and that would be other species and also other flora and fauna that would be naturally occurring in that area. As far as offsetting for the removal of trees, there is a distinct difference between a replacement program and what we're removing. So they are two separate programs. However, for replacement, and it's considered part of the wider green infrastructure strategy, is trees that are planted will be of a natural native species and mixed species. And the reason for that as well is to ensure that any future diseases that perhaps would come along, again, would only affect individuals within a cluster, as opposed to, you know, root and branch planting the same species across a wide area. So there are various strategies associated with that. Does that answer your questions, Councillor?
That's very useful. Thank you.
Okay,
Could I ask
thank
you a question related to that, Peter?
Direct to that, because I've got Bridget also waiting to speak.
It's just directly related to that. You mentioned about the replanting there. For example, at Caswell Valley woodland is, as I understand it, a very high percentage, about 80% ash. Deb will probably have a more accurate figure on it than me there. But when you say let nature take its course, if so many trees in one area are going to be felled or falling down, what happens then? Because obviously that really, if they're all felled or die off within a short period of time, what's the impact on the ecology for the area and everything at that time?
Jeremy,
I'll bring Deb in on this one around the effect of the ecology. What I would answer in relation to if there is wholesale felling required in a particular area, so the large majority of trees there are ash, then there needs to be a future plan around land development and development of the biodiversity in that area and replanting schemes that would fall into a wider land management plan. Deb, have you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, thanks.
Deb, are you able to?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So with regard to Bishopswood Local Nature Reserve, which is also a special area of conservation under Natura 2000 designation for the oak ash woodland assemblage, it does rather kind of change the situation. But with the work that we've done so far is just focused around the access routes, because it's a very popular, well-used reserve with a main kind of path going up the middle. So we've tried to make sure, with the help of Martin Bignell and his team, that any dangerous overhanging trees have been taken out. We don't intend to fell any trees in the woodland. They'll just be left to fall naturally as and when they succumb to the dieback, and some of them are still showing some resilience. So as Jeremy says, we don't want to sort of take those out in case they are the ones, the genetic kind of stock that will help to repopulate. I know that in terms of biodiversity, there are a number of species that are wholly dependent on ash, and obviously they're the ones that are going to suffer. So there is guidance which is out there, and we've produced some localized guidance on how to deal with that issue. And in terms of replanting, there are about 50 species of trees that have been identified to be able to provide hosts for the invertebrates, mosses, lichens, and other species that are currently dependent on ash. So I guess what we'd be doing is trying to select for those, like oak and alder and even sycamore and horse chestnut. There's a whole range of species. So I think with regards to the regeneration of saplings and seedlings from the ash seed that has fallen, yes, probably they will be similarly affected because it's the same genetic stock, but at least they're providing a kind of intermediate habitat for some of those dependent species. So in a way, I think good to let nature carry on with that. And there are other things that can be done, like just leaving stumps, not cutting them down totally, but leaving kind of standing trunks, and even like some of the dead wood, because some of the lichens can carry on living on that wood even once the ash is felled. So there's a kind of range of things there, really. But
just to follow up on that, does that mean it'll look quite bare in the valley for a few years then? Because that's what it sounds like. If you're allowing nature to take its course, it'll look very different for a few years, will it?
If they all go at the same time, and they are all of a fairly even age, then yeah, that is what will happen. And probably sycamore will come in. What we've got to do is stop the invasive species coming in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you, Deb. I mean, I read in the Tree Council report a list of a number of what the report refers to as obligates in relation to species dependent wholly or partly on ash. There didn't seem to be that many, but obviously for those particular species, it is a serious potential loss. But I'm encouraged by what you were saying, Deb, that the possibility of alternative species can be put in place that will provide habitat for the lost ash. Okay, thank you. Bridget, you're waiting to speak.
Oh, thank you, Peter. My question is, my ward, as you all know, is a very rural ward. And a lot of whilst I understand about the council-owned land and how that's all been surveyed and is being treated as the category is, you know, the most important done at the, you know, when it needs to be done. Private land. There's, you know, in my ward, I've got a lot of private land that overlooks people's property, and it also is onto the main highway. And there are issues of ash dieback, which could and will cause potential harm to either the highway or people's property. What policy do we have in place to, I don't know if the correct word is to make landowners responsible? I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but I wonder if somebody could just answer that, please.
Jeremy?
Yes, there's two areas here. The first one is the under the Highways Act. And this is part of, we formed an action group at the start of our development program around how we were going to deal with ash dieback back at the back end of 2018, early 19, and that group involves officers from highways. And what they've done is they've trained their highways inspectors and actually taken on an additional highway inspector for the specific purposes of identifying ash trees within the more threatening categories that potentially would impact the highway. So where there are trees on private land that could impact the highway, we have powers to enforce on the landowners to deal with those trees. And should they not deal with them, we can then encroach on the land ourselves and deal with them, and then put chargebacks associated with the works that are needed. To date, that's not been required. Any enforcement action and recommendations that have taken place have been acted upon. Mm-hmm. Where trees are on private land and then effectively could impact on other private land, there are no powers or responsibilities, in my knowledge, that we would get involved in relation to that, and it's down to the private landowners to resolve that as a personal dispute between them and the other private landowner.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mark, is there anything you wanted to add to Jeremy's response on that?
No, I mean, look, we did, as Jeremy said, when we set up this group and we were facing this enormous task back in, I didn't realise it was that far back. I thought it was last year, but it's probably 3 years ago. Time goes so quick. You know, we realised very, very early on that we could not fix this problem for everyone in Swansea. It's not through a lack of will, but we absolutely could not be expected to. As I said in my summing up earlier on, is we have, despite us having, you know, a very good team and a large team of arborists, then we also have to use contractors to supplement some of our work. If we were even attempted to look into addressing, you know, trees in people's gardens and private residences, it would be an impossible task. And so early on, we recognised that was something that we reluctantly would have to refuse to get involved with, and we recognised that we probably would be asked about it, because whenever people have challenges and difficulties around their homes and their home life, they often turn to the council. As we're all aware, as councillors, we know that people will contact us over things that are not the responsibility of the council, but they still see the council and councillors as people they can trust and turn to for advice and help. And we're happy to, you know, sort of advise people, but we can't get into tree inspections, and because if we're doing that, then we cannot be doing what we have to do. So we've had to sort of stick by the lines of where we have a duty to treat, fell, manage the trees on our land. So, and that's the only duty we have, and we have to stick with that. Anything else would be a distraction. And I do, when I'm saying it, I know how for some people that could be seen as the council not being helpful, but it's an impossible task. As I said, we haven't got the resources that we would like to have to be able to not only fell trees, but look at replanting trees. So we've also had to hold back on any planting schemes because we've had to treat it as two different phases. Phase one will be to fell. Phase two to be looking at how can we replace and replant trees that have been lost. We haven't got the capacity to do all that at the same time. So anything else, as I said, it's not meant to be callous. It's not meant to be a disregard for public ownership. But we've had to sort of stick to what we have a statutory duty to undertake, and then apologise that we can't help individuals out, with their particular problems.
I think what would be useful as well is just in addition would be to signpost inquiries that members receive from members of the public to the council website. The new external website is very intuitive. You only have to start typing the word ash in there and it brings up our FAQ pages now. And there is information in there about private land ownership and also businesses, as well as what we do in relation to responsible for our own public land.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything in Swansea that we have done or could do as a council to draw to the attention of private landowners who do have ash trees on their property and who may or may not be aware of the problem? Is there anything we can do to make them aware and the possible risks that they face?
At the start of the programme of works that we did in relation to this, the Ash Dieback Toolkit has 4 phases within it, as recommended by the Tree Council, and we followed that. The second phase is in relation to communication and publicity, and back in 2019 we did extensive public communications, both on media, Wales Online, through our own website and social media, to highlight the issues and therefore meet those sort of obligations under it. I think it's so well known and publicised now that we'd be satisfied. For those landowners where they, as I say, have trees that potentially encroach on the highway or could cause damage to or safety issues that we would be responsible for, the majority of those landowners have now been written to by highways and been notified.
That's great. Thank you very much for that answer. It's very reassuring. Will, you still got your hand up. Was there something else you wanted to raise? Will Thomas? No? Okay. Hazel Morris, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, I've been listening to you all very carefully, and I'm just wondering, is there any chance of cross-contamination to other species, or it's stay within the ash trees?
At this stage, it's specifically genetically affecting ash trees themselves, although there are varying species of ash trees, and within those varying species, there's different severities. But at this stage, it's only known to be affecting ash trees.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question or points they want to raise with Jeremy, with Mark, or indeed with anyone? One thing that interests me is the issue of this small percentage, maybe 10% or so of ash trees that apparently are resistant to the disease, and therefore the importance of trying to protect those trees and then to use them as a base for species recovery of ash trees. Do we know whether any research is being done on this, say at Swansea University or elsewhere? And if so, could someone comment on that, please? Jeremy, you're nodding.
I know that there's extensive research being done within DEFRA to look at the resistance and whether it's specifically genetically linked to specific variants of the ash tree itself. As far as Swansea University are concerned, I'm not sure. Maybe Deb could comment on that. What I do know is that from our own community, so our lead arboriculturalist, which is Martin Bignall, and his immediate worker supervisor Simon John, are involved in national tree management groups and part of the Tree Council, so that they feed back where they have trees that they've identified as resistance, and then they can provide samples of those if necessary to assist in any research. But I'm not aware or have any knowledge of the university being involved, although I'd be surprised if they're not. Deb, have you got anything on that?
Not in regards to university, but I know, there is, as you say, national research going on, like with Kew Gardens and others. So I think that's why it is important that we don't just take out all the ash, straight away without waiting to see which ones seem to be doing okay, and making sure that, if they're the ones that are going to populate the future, then they're still there to do so. So, but yes, I know there's a lot of research going on, but I don't know what the latest situation is.
that links with the surveying that we do as well. So I think I mentioned it in the report. It's very interesting that as it develops, we expect trees to go from category 1 through to 4 over a period of 4 to 5 years once they're mature. But what we've actually seen this year is some trees that were categorised in level 3 last year, which were requiring immediate felling. This year, visibly, they look like they're category 2s. And there are additional environmental impacts that happen on the tree, such as windburn, that can give the effect or the knowledge that potentially they are at an advanced stage of infection when actually they're not. So our constant surveying that we're doing is key to make sure that trees that do then display a resistance, whether they get to stage 3 and then start displaying resistance and come back from that we don't fell them. So this is why it's taking that additional time, is making sure we're very prescriptive and only taking out the trees that are causing an immediate health and safety risk in category 3 and 4 levels.
Yeah, so basically we're facing a situation in which over time the disease will become endemic within the remaining ash tree population, but hopefully that remaining population will have built up, dare I phrase, herd resistance to the infection.
That's how we foresee it, yeah, and it's definitely for the long haul.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Are there any other points that members want to raise on this topic? I think we had a useful, informative discussion, and clearly the work that has been done will continue. It's a costly exercise, but it has to be done. And hopefully out of this will come some kind of recovery in due course, including, of course, the introduction of alternative species that can fill some of the gaps. But one of the tragedies, of course, quite apart from the impact on landscape and on individuals' dependent species, is the, I guess, small reduction in carbon sequestration. We mustn't forget that trees are a major part, or will become an increasing part, of the recovery programme for combating climate change, and it's sad that any species is going to be lost for whatever reason, but that's the situation we're in. Will, you've got your hand up.
I'm not on mute. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one really about sort of communicating with the public about what it is that's going on and how that's being done. And I've seen some things on various communications, but just wondering what's being done with that, because obviously a lot of people just see a tree being chopped down, or and obviously in areas where large percentages of woodland are being affected, again as an example, Castle Valley, is it worth putting up notice boards, just maybe to explain to people what's happening? So just comments on that, if you will, please.
I can answer that one there, if that's okay. Absolutely right, Councillor. As far as we're concerned, the public perception of us felling trees can often be distressing for some people, and they can be confrontational with our arborists. So where we are carrying out tree felling operations that are of a substantial nature, so a good example would be on some of the cycle path through Clyne that we've dealt with. We put signage in advance. And then we also have, while the works are undertaking, signage to show and explain why, and give further information around where they can get additional information as well. And then also when we leave a site, if we've, where we've left clearance and stumps and chippings, we leave signage on posts in the ground to give follow-up information for people who might then arrive and suddenly go, where on earth have all these trees gone? So it is something that we do on the larger scale works. But we're happy to receive feedback, if members see in their area that these works are undertaking and that perhaps that signage isn't being placed and they're receiving questions, please come to us and we'll arrange for that to happen. Yeah, okay, great. Just on a follow up to that, Peter, if you don't mind, what bigger sites, maybe a more permanent signage might be an idea, and just I'm sure it's a lot of admin, but just an idea of sponsor a tree might be a nice idea for people to get involved with, and aid that for them to make them feel that they've had something to do with planting a new tree and things like that. It might be an idea to help replenish the stock. Cheers.
Okay, Deb, I see you've got your hand up. Was it on this particular point?
It was really just about the comms, you know, with the public, that just to perhaps also highlight the fact that, you know, obviously if it's a really serious, you know, safety issue and a tree has to come out, it has to come out. But normally all of the normal legal obligations still apply to trees with ash dieback. So European protected species, nesting birds and the like, you know, tree preservation orders and felling licenses. You know, just because a tree's got ash dieback doesn't mean that you can just go ahead and clear it. So, you know, as I say, obviously there are caveats on that, but just something that people might not be aware of.
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Thank you. Mary, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was a comment that Jeremy just made about signage and cycle track, actually, the original cycle track, the old railway track. And you might put the signs up when you're actually doing the work, but when people are going down afterwards, there was nothing at all. And we had, my husband's obviously ward it is, but people were just contacting us and asking why there was huge gaps. And we didn't know, we weren't notified as ward members that the work was going to be carried out. So I know it's difficult and you've got to go in, but I think it would be advisable to let the ward members know if you're going to be working in their wards. Now, I know obviously the cycle path, that one goes to a number of wards, you know, it's quite a large area, but one email to us all saying that you are working there would have been, you know, a lot more for us trying to ring you and find out what was going on. So it's a point really for the future if you're doing, I mean, it was, as you said, a large scale operation there. There was a lot of trees come down so far. So I don't know how much more you've got to do, but yeah, please bear in mind for the future.
Yeah, absolutely take on board your comments there, Councillor, and perhaps as Councillor Thomas also suggested, where we've had large-scale works undertaken that are still looking bare, we could arrange for some more substantial signage to stay for a period afterwards to help answer the questions, because the ones that we put in were specifically designed to be temporary and actually biodegrade, so we wouldn't have to go back and remove them. However, for best intentions, obviously, they've gone sooner than we would have expected, and therefore people have not been notified. As far as notifying members are concerned, I'll take that back and discuss it with our tree services team. Where they have planned works, I don't see why there should be any specific difficulties in publicising that within members, so they have the knowledge to be able to answer queries from their constituents.
I think there should be a recommendation back from this on the right to the Cabinet member. It is an important point, and thank you, Mary, for raising it in this context. And of course, in the wider context, the members of the public increasingly, I hope, are aware of the contribution that trees and tree planting can make to climate change control. And naturally, when people see trees being cut down and they don't necessarily understand the issue in terms of ash dieback, that this can cause a negative public reaction. So it's very important that members of the public are aware that we're cutting down trees for good reason, and obviously are aware of the climate consequences of doing so. Are there any further questions or comments on this ash dieback issue, or have we reached a conclusion? I think it's been a very good discussion. We've covered some of the key points. I think we can commend the officers on the continuing work that is being done. We understand the resource constraint within which they have to operate. Sadly, it all has to be done. And thank you, Jeremy, thank you, Chris, thank you, Debs, for your contributions, and thank you, Mark, for introducing and responding to questions on this issue. So I think that concludes then item 6. If the officers and Mark want to leave, can do so at this point, because the other issue that we have to look at is our work plan. And so thank you to officers, etc. Thank you. Okay, we've got the item 7, which is the work plan 21/2022, and of course we've just concluded our 26th August meeting. The next meeting will take place on Wednesday, the 6th of October, and this will be a very watery meeting. It will combine the issue of local flood management and also the related but different issue of water pollution. And that promises to be quite a long meeting, I suspect. We had to postpone, I think it was local flood management from what had been this meeting today, and the availability of the necessary officers for reasons of holiday leave and so forth. So that promises to be a very interesting meeting, and of course it will relate to. And then we're meeting after that, not until the 12th of January 2022, God help us, when provisionally we have the issue of green space, weed and verge management. This is a perennial issue, I think it's fair to say, for those of us interested in the natural environment scene. I see Hannah nodding when I say that. And obviously, certainly when I came onto the council back in May 2017, one of my first concerns was with the council's use of glyphosate as a weed control chemical. And although I understand that this has been much reduced, nevertheless it does remain an issue, and there are some plants such as Japanese knotweed that seem resistant to virtually anything apart from glyphosate. Nevertheless, we do need to look at it because of its implications, not only for the plants themselves, but for associated wildlife, fauna and so forth, insects and birds. So I'm not quite sure why we got it down as provisional. Emily, can you comment on that, please? Why have we got green space down as only to be considered, or is there
Yes, certainly,
a consideration to confirm it?
Certainly, Chair, so that's just penciled in, and I'll need to confirm relevant officers for that. But hopefully that looks set to go ahead.
That's great, thank you. That's very reassuring. And then we've got a final meeting on Tuesday, the 15th of March, with as yet no topic for inclusion. Do members have any particular issues that you feel haven't been properly addressed in the last 6 months or so, that perhaps we should be addressing at that meeting?
Could have a bit of a think about that, Chair, maybe, and maybe email you.
Okay, that'd be interesting. I mean, my sort of reserve position on it is that from time to time, of course, we ask Deb Hill and her team for an update on the work of the nature conservation officers of the council, and we last did that, of course, back in March of this year. So if all else fails, or perhaps in addition to anything that Will or any other member wishes to suggest, I think it would be about timely for that March meeting to have an annual update, because I know that Deb's team have been very busy. They've been very successful in getting grants from a number of bodies, including NRW, which has enabled them to do things they've not hitherto perhaps had the resource to do. And of course, they also have both a Section 6 officer, courtesy of this, courtesy of the council, and a full-time planning ecologist. And those people will be doing things that will be useful to have a report on how they're progressing. So I think we'll just bear that in mind for the moment. Will, you want to get in touch with me with any ideas? And other members, if you could too, get in touch with me and copy in Emily, please, so that we can see what the options are. If that's it, well, that's the conclusion of the meeting. If I could just ask Emily to stay on for a moment, and if members would have a good holiday weekend. I'm off to Snowdon straight after this meeting. Not sure whether I'm looking forward to it or not. I last climbed Snowdon when I was 17 years of age, and that was 1 or 2 years ago. So it's going to be interesting. But thanks to everybody. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.